Today we're asking the question, is it time to end the secular state? There's a myth in the West that the state as it exists, the state which provides you with your infrastructure, taxes you, provides you with social services, schools, hospitals, it is neutral. We call it secular. But this is a myth that only persists in the West. In fact, the state is socialist. The state is atheist. They are opposed to all religions. We see that increasingly in the West. Their real target, though they will never admit it, is the church. The way they get around this is they allow the immigration of people with extremist views. The most exceptional are people who support an Islamic state. In Syria and Iraq, they established what they called the Caliphate of the Islamic State. 120 Australians migrated illegally to fight in these wars to establish the Caliphate in Syria and Iraq. Defeated, they now apply to return home, bringing with them wives and children. Many of these wives are slaves. They were taken captive in the battles with Christians, with Yazidis, forcibly converted, and now they want to come home. The children have taken part in atrocities. The wives have supported these atrocities. Why would you allow them to return? Since 2015, these IS veterans, and remember, up to 40,000 arrived in the Caliphate from every country in the world. These people have, since 2015, been carrying out terrorist attacks in Britain, in Germany, in France, Belgium, other countries. There have been several attempts in Australia. All these are suppressed by the police, suppressed by the secular, so-called neutral media. But one purpose served by these returning fanatics, and remember, the reason why they went to the Caliphate was to get training to be blooded in combat, killing Christians, killing Yazidis, killing minority sects like the Shia. They then return to their homeland and carry out the revolution. So they've had their training, they've had their practical exam, and having passed, back to your homeland, back to your adopted homeland, and start actions. And that's what they've done. So why would you allow them back in? Well, this is the reason why they were recruited and allowed to leave. And they're now being allowed back in. Say, for example, in Australia, 120 fanatics, terrorists, killers. We would like to exclude them, the average person. But the state, the neutral, secular state, says, no, we can't exclude them. But there's evidence they've carried out atrocities. They're war criminals. They're mass murderers. The state says, no, that's evidence provided by the Syrian government, and we don't recognise the Syrian government because we're trying to overthrow them because they're bad people. They're bad people because the Americans say so, the British say so, all our imperial masters say so. Yeah, okay, like they led us into 2 world wars, they led us into Vietnam, they led us into, and we're believing them still? Yeah, so we disregard what the Syrian government says and we let these terrorists return to all the Western states because we're not going to believe the Syrians, are we? And Trooper Lee Rigby was run over by a car, pinned to a wall, and then had his head taken off with a blunt knife in Britain. Other atrocities have taken place. The Charlie Hebdo attacks, when the 8 of the editorial board were massacred, the various attacks in various countries. It goes on and on and on because these 40,000 terrorists are going to commit 40,000 terror attacks when they return. But the secular state says, well, we can't pick on them just because they're of a particular religion. So what happens? Well, the atheists and the secularists then masquerade as defenders of Western values. The Islamic people are offended by what they see as excess, what we call Western values. For example, Miley Cyrus and her twerking, and other people who parade themselves. I could go down a long list of singers who have copied Miley Cyrus or who she has copied, and these are offensive to moral people, which there are a decreasing number every day in the West. It's almost like the media, the fashion industry. They encourage hedonism, self-indulgence, what we could almost call Kardashianism. There's also a drug culture. It's propagated in clubs, etc. We look at the recent election in America, the state of Oregon, where Portland had 100 days of riots, 100 days and nights of lawlessness, burning down police stations, occupying the 3rd precinct in Portland for that time. They just legalised all drugs. Cocaine, heroin, everything is legal. Okay, so no police, no jobs, COVID running rife, and what's the latest results we hear from Portland? There has been an 800% increase in murder in Portland, and in Minneapolis a 400% increase in murder in 12 months. But it's got nothing doing with the defunding police campaign. Oh no. So Facebook will often ban people they disagree with, because Facebook, Silicon Valley, these people are your average secularists. You mean they're neutral? No, I mean they're atheists and socialists. So they talk about community values, but what community? Well, the socialist community. And anyone who disagrees with them talks about amoral behaviour or immoral behaviour. Well, they're bad people and they have to be banned. Anyone who has any morals at all. So this is an interesting situation where people of faith, Islamic people, Christian people, are thrown together in the same boat. We don't agree on doctrine, we don't agree on beliefs, but we're both hedged into a corner by these fake neutrals, these rabid atheists who hate all religion. Now, France is a good example. They talk about banning religion from the public space, and we see things, strange things happening, like Notre Dame Cathedral being burnt down over a year ago. And a recent article from a Catholic newspaper said that every 2 weeks a Catholic cathedral, church, school or holy site is destroyed in France, and the state does nothing about it. Allegedly, it's not Islamic terrorists who are doing this, but it's rabid atheists. Yes, they say that the state, the church, represents patriarchy. It's hard to fathom because the secular, neutral media are refusing to report it. Only the very small Christian Catholic media are reporting it, and of course they're denounced as fake news. Now, what's the reality? All states are founded on principles. For example, the Five Eyes, what they're called the Five Eyes: Canada, New Zealand, Australia, United Kingdom and America are all founded by Christians. Islamic states are all founded to be Islamic states. The Christian states were founded to be Christian, guided by Christian principles. We can tell the difference because if you look at their flag, you'll see, like on our flag in the future Queensland state, there is a cross. We have 2 crosses. The British flag has 4 crosses representing the 4 states that make up Britain. The Islamic states bear either the crescent and the moon, or they are green in colour. For example, Turkey or Libya, Morocco, North African states. So the flags of Europe, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland and others have crosses on them. It's simple because for 1400 years these 2 sides were in fighting, crusades, invasions by Islam, etc. So one side would identify the other by the battle flags. Christians on one side, Islamic on the other. The goal is to mark friends from foes. Now, World War II had 3 sides. There were the fascists, the capitalists and the communists. Now, the European fascists, they fought against the communists. but they also fought against the capitalists. Now, the communists should have lost that war, but they did not, because surprisingly to the fascists and to most other people, the communists who had been at each other's throats, at the capitalists' throats for many years, suddenly turned around and allied with the capitalists against the fascists. So the fascists in the Central Europe, they made up all the central powers like they did in World War One. They were pinned from the capitalists on one side and the communists on the other, and they were crushed. So it's an alliance of Marxists and capitalists. They should have been opposed to each other, and the fascists were as surprised as everyone else. When we read World War II's history, we see it written by the capitalists and the communists. And one thing they ignore is the role played by the Germans and the Russians in their alliance from 1939 to 41. It led to the fall of Poland, when both countries invaded Poland, but you only ever hear of the Polish invasion by the Germans, never by the Russians a couple of weeks later. And that's what defeated the Poles, not the Germans, but the Russians. So we hear Hitler, war criminal, invaded Poland. But what about Stalin, war criminal, also invaded Poland? Oh no, we can't say that, because the media, the current states across the West are all socialist, all pro-Stalin, all atheist. So they support the Stalinist, communist, atheist regime. So they actually erase their war crimes from history. The famous one, of course, is Katyn, when they massacred Polish civilians and military, but that's been erased from history. And when the war ended, the US capitalists who entered the war in 41 to save Marxism, which only at that time existed in Russia, the fascists failed to predict this alliance. So today it is ignored. It was American aid via British-occupied Iran that saved Russia, not the infamous convoys to Archangel and Murmansk, which cost thousands of Allied lives, and Germans too. The capitalists and the communists united for one reason: to destroy fascism. Today we hear talk of IS, Islamic State, as Islamofascism. This is a pejorative term, but it is not inaccurate. Islamic society, as seen in Iran and its allies, is robust. It's healthy. It's an alternative to both atheistic Marxism and atheistic, so-called secular capitalism. Both of these worship man and his creations. Islam is like the church, regardless of denomination. We worship only God and his creation. Is it not time to cut out this false middle man, middle woman, the secular atheist state? It's hostile to God and it's hostile to godly people. It persecutes us increasingly. Why should we tolerate it when it has absolutely no toleration for us? Is it time to end the myth of the secular state?